radio in Bermuda during that time was very, very segregated. When I tried to get a job in broadcasting, I kept going back and applying. I applied for 3 years. I would go there maybe 5 times a year and apply for a job. And they would refuse me. And they refused me because I was black. And then finally I went up and I said, look, I know that there's a job open. I had gotten to know some of the people in broadcasting up there. I know there's a job, and I'm a Bermudian and I'm entitled to it. And the management of the broadcasting company had just changed as well. The new manager was a man named Walter Steska. And I was taken up to his office, and he told the program director to give me a part-time job. When the program director took me around to introduce me in that station, there were 3 people that quit. There was a person that spat on the floor in front of me. And I had to make up my mind how I was going to handle this. I was taken into the locker room and I was given a locker. And I was told, you can put your things in here. And the program director said, look, I'm sorry about all of this. And he left. And I said, how are we going to handle this? And I decided, it just came to me. Whenever somebody did something evil towards you, you return it with kindness. And that's what I did. And I had to work hard to prove that I was entitled to have a job in broadcasting. And it was after that the situation started to ease, and other black people were being given jobs as well.
There were a lot of disc jockeys, that's what we used to call them, who really became household words. Wilbur Smith, for example. Nobody would think of leaving home without listening to Wilbur Smith. Quentin Edness at night. No one would go to bed without listening to the curly-headed kid in the third row who had the most immaculate program with velvety voice. And Quentin Edness was so famous that, the powers that be were forced to bring him on to daytime radio because, at that time, we didn't have any daytime radio slots. So with Quentin, I remember him being one of the first in fact, to really take in daytime radio. And it may seem strange to people today that daytime radio was different. I mean, you turn on your radio now, and you listen to Shirley Dill, you listen to Gina Spence and all. But in those days, they were slotted into what we consider a not very important slot. But Quentin and others forced the situation to change by the product they delivered. And of course, the advertisers loved it because everybody tuned into them. I think that the role that Quentin played in changing the perception of broadcasters was pivotal. There was a bit of a social change going on, but not as much as the demand for the right voice and the right content. The social change was sort of slowly following along, but it didn't move as fast as the audience wanted this change.
In those days, the powers that be, that had everything just about locked up. When I say locked up, I mean radio, television, all the businesses all around were owned by the very wealthy Bermudian. Also, they had, as it were, a grip on the political scene, whereby the laws that were made in favor of them, and folks decided they wanted to keep it that way. So there was unrest, boycotting. Black folk could not go into certain theaters. You could not vote unless you had property in the parishes that you were. It was a whole lot of things that I can't even think of now that hindered us, and so unrest took place.
Yes, yeah. Talking to all the black people then. Say, arise, run, come and start uniting, and stop all the fighting. Arise, and awake from your sleepless slumber. Black man unite. We can
Theatre boycotts were extensively covered by both the electronic and the print media. Because you have to remember, in those days, the print media was predominantly white and the electronic media was predominantly white. But they had their few black reporters, and they were covered extensively. They had to cover them because it was such an unusual occasion. So they couldn't avoid not covering them. Pictures, stories, and so they didn't leave everything to the recorder. The Mid-Ocean News, which doesn't exist anymore, the Royal Gazette, the Bermuda Sun, they all covered the issues of the day.
You can't reap good if you don't plant good seeds. So the war and segregation we don't need. Look who is hurting when there's no unity. So let's bring back the love in the community. And let's arise and awake from your sleep.
It was hard to be one-sided about the theatre boycotts because they were in your face. I mean, you know, television wasn't as sort of mobile as it is now, but you couldn't sort of fake anything. It was all in your face. You had to report it accurately. Where the difficulty may have come would be in the editorial, the editor's viewpoint. But you couldn't mistake what was going on. And even I, as a young reporter, going over to the theatre boycott, it was right there. All I had to do was just make notes because it was all happening right before my eyes.
You gonna go, sit in the desolation.
In the front line of radio and television, there were really no blacks. That changed. You know, blacks were not in managerial positions. So that changed. And I think I recall, you know, Quentin Adams becoming sales manager, and even Jim Borge rising up in the sales ranks. And then we had people who would then have a particular voice in broadcasting. But there were definitely some changes after all that.
Black man unite. We can't wait any longer.
When I ended broadcasting right after the theater boycott, Bermuda was going through a lot of changes in those days. Children were going away to school and coming back and not able to get the kind of jobs that they worked for. I remember Mr. Montague Shepard tried to open a radio station after coming back from Canada, and he was successful in doing that in one of his father's homes.
My grandfather, this is his property, and he gave it to my father to operate his business, his radio business here. Those days it was hard to find somewhere to rent, so my grandfather gave him this until he moved his business into the other building by the sea on North Shore, which was his television station at that time. Yeah, this is where it all began. In 1962, when my dad started his new business, broadcasting business, in my grandfather's cottage at his house on Barkley Road. It's amazing. That long ago. It just feels different, and I'm taking myself back to 1962, even though I was small at the time, but it gives you a different feeling. 60 years ago. It's just amazing. I wish he was here to see this.
You know, why was it important to have Capital Broadcasting in Bermuda when you opened it up?
I really thought it was a great opportunity for people to get involved in that broadcast. And well, a lot of people had studied the daily operations, but were not able to produce it. No one would take them on.
And when you say people, which people are you
I'm
speaking?
talking about the other broadcasting, the broadcasting company at the time, Bermuda Broadcasting.
So Bermuda Broadcasting, they weren't taking on black engineers and broadcasters.
No, they just didn't have that sort of thing. They had the odd one.
Okay.
But so many people were denied getting into it. And when we came about, we were loaded with people wanting to become broadcasters.
Anything you would do differently with Capital?
So it was successful, fully. After a while, I wondered, how the hell do you get this far? When you think of all the past problems and whatnot, you gotta wonder, how the heck did I get this? I mean, it's bigger than I ever thought it could be.
Race played a major part in broadcasting, and I don't think anybody could deny this. There were people who would rather see a white face on television. And so as a result, the black face was used occasionally. And then when the black face really came into vogue, it had to be a particular type of face. The darker hue was not always considered acceptable. You had to have a little more of a bronze complexion. And this was never spelled out, it was just the way things were. And for the anchoring, the evening news, for example, you primarily did not see someone of my skin tone on the evening news. It just didn't happen. You could have the voice of God, but you know, it was a certain image, the broadcasting image. When people turned on their television, I suspect the architects of television felt that they wanted to see something that was good looking, white, light skinned, and attractive.
Not so good times was we lost some clients once. I went on vacation, left here with all this long hair, came back with an afro. I was probably the first career woman with an afro. And one of my biggest clients had on radio and television. When they saw me come on television, they canceled all the advertising because I had an afro. Well, we seem to be working on a lot of things all at once with, at that time, secondhand equipment, but we came out on top. You know, people wondered how they do that, you know. Well, we had the expertise. The people we had were trained broadcasters, first of all. And they were trained in England, Canada, and the United States. We had Cousin Juicy, Archie Brown, and of course Sturgis Griffin, his brothers, Denny Griffin and Marshall Griffin. And then there was Wayne Simons and a bunch of people we had working down there. Lee Tucker, Randall Tucker used to work there at one time, and his brother Webster. Of course, he worked up here. I don't think he worked down there. Then we have the great Joe Brown. That'd be my. When it came to soccer games, he had people coming out to these games, and you would have thought that, you know, we had TV there at the time, but we didn't have TV there. but he brought people out just with his voice. He was talking about things that he didn't know about pertaining to cricket especially. And he just came out. We had a great rapport with the BFA and the Bermuda Track and Field Association. We used to cover all those events with actual talent out there shooting footage and getting back to the station. And at that time, they would put all this on film, go back to the studio and edit it. Then years later, we got onto videotape, and I think that was a 2-inch videotape or 1.5-inch videotape. On occasion, I had to be flown out of Bermuda just to bring a fight back to Bermuda with Muhammad Ali, because we didn't have satellite at that time. And we had to fly people out to pick up these programs and get back on Eastern Airlines the very next morning, you know, so that can be on the TV news that night.
To get the real feeling, got to know. Mama Africa say we coming home.
On the news side, the newsroom, 100% foreign, 100% white, until I came in, and later a guy from St. George's came in, Lionel Trott. He eventually went overseas also. But the situation in the newsroom was really terrible when we had issues. The journalists did not know how to handle the issues and shied away from it. So most of their coverage came from within the newsroom. The news director, John Ferguson, they never went out when things were happening. As an example, you know, there's a shooting. Middle of the night, news people, you go to that and you do their coverage. His idea of covering it was the day afterwards, he would go and stand up at the site and he would do a stand-up. The immediacy was lost, the story just wasn't there. So I went into Quentin Edness, the manager, and I said, look, either they go or I go, because you're paying people, the country is not being served, and I'm wasting my time. I've got the education on it, I've had the experience, but I'm sitting, going into a guy, asking him if I should go and cover something. That started a move where I was made deputy news director, whatever that meant, and then news director. Upon my becoming news director, there was an exodus of the whites and the foreigners. One and the same, actually. But that was okay, because we then started to do real news.
In 1967, Bermuda was going through political, social, and economic change. And Quentin and I happened to be to the forefront of that change, because we were both black Bermudians who were sought after to help to bring about an equalization of the status quo. Quentin at the time was the general manager, and I was the director of sales. Both became ministers in the government, and therefore had a role in the running of the day-to-day affairs, not only of the country, but of ZBM, which was the largest radio and television station on the island.
The information that was being put out in the mainstream media at that time was what the powers that be wanted to get out. Now, in my early days of newscasting, gathering information through camera, sound on film, I would go to a news conference and gather this information along with Ira Phillip. We would go back to the studio and we would edit it, whatever we needed to, and put it on. The next day in the Royal Gazette, sometimes I would wonder if I was at the same news conference that they were at, because it did not represent what was said at the news conference. And so with black ownership, it opened doors for employment. It opened doors for people to advertise, the small black business owner to be able to advertise and get their product out. And so things started to move in a direction that would help the black community.
So like here in 2020, I can't imagine being told no. That if I really wanted to do something, and this is something that I'm passionate about, like I love radio, I could not imagine being this passionate about something and being told, sorry, you're black. Those are the types of struggles that a Montague Shepard ran through. Those are the types of barriers that God bless and rest his soul, that he put in that type of work. And because of him, people like me can have the passion and the love and have the opportunity. Now, does that mean that the same barriers don't exist? They're a little bit more subtle now. But at least we have the opportunity. And with that opportunity, hopefully future generations can appreciate, you know, we're still on that journey. It started in a very dark place. It's still, you know, challenging, but we're making progress.
Always here, there, and everywhere. Never giving you more than what you really can bear. Jah is always here, there, and everywhere. Never giving you more than what you really can bear. Gonna tell you about this story. This story name is glory. Victory the story, success is the party. Everyone feeling merry. It's an honor to fight for this glory. Our nation, oh what a duty, to see everyone coming together, all because of humanity. Let us get up and fight. Let us stand up and fight for our rights. Let us unite against this monster plague in our society tonight. Let us get up and fight. Let us stand up and fight for our rights. Let them know, say, wow, might can't beat right. Jah is always here, there, and everywhere. Never giving you more than what you really can bear. Jah is always here, there, and everywhere. Never giving you more than what you really can bear. Gonna tell you about this story. This story name is glory. Victory the story, success is the party. Everyone feeling merry. It's an honor to fight for this glory. Our nation, oh what a duty, to see everyone coming together,